my daughter's boyfriend, with whom they had a child with, got a phone call that he had a little brother and sister that he didn't know about. He and his 5 siblings had been adopted to a home up in Dawson Creek because their mother was unable to parent them. And so she had had a couple more kids, which they didn't know about. So I took him and my daughter and my grandson, and we traveled down to the reserve. And we met the cutest little children ever. They were having a family circle to discuss what was going to happen with them. So I just, let him go, and I was going to just sit and watch my grandson. But the social worker said, "No, you're a part of this family. Please come and, sit." The band was still in the process of finding family or community members who could take the kids. That's their first, how they do it. But I sat there and went, my husband and I are here. We're willing to take the kids and raise them and love them, and they will be raised around family. So we waited for the process to, and we got to know the kids. We went that next month in December to the Christmas party for the band and spent time with the kids. Mind you, before that, my daughter's boyfriend had no idea where his band was, anything like that. The adoptive parents kept up with nothing they were supposed to. And so I had been helping him, and then after that I helped him to get his status back. So we got to know the kids, and so in August the social worker called and said, "The band has exhausted, all their avenues, and they wish for you and your husband to adopt the kids." So we were just ecstatic, and she and I went through things, and it just happened that my husband's name was Michael, and the little boy's name was Michael as well. So we started on this journey. We would go into Vancouver and have more one-on-one and just family time with them. The cultural worker would bring them before we were approved. That Christmas, we were approved to have them for a few days through Christmas, and they came and stayed with us alone. And then that March, so we were splitting. They were coming to our house on weekends, or we would go into the city and spend time with them. And then March, they moved in with us. So they came to live with us. Everything was great. We got them into daycare. Challenges started. She had only been in one foster care before they moved them to the home that they came to us from. So she had, in the end, we learned it was trauma and attachment disorder, because that was a huge trauma for her, where he was used to being moved. Within a few weeks to a month, we started seeing behaviors. The daycare couldn't handle it, so towards the end of the year, they wouldn't take her anymore to daycare. So we navigated all of that, and we were so out of anything that we knew, but we couldn't give up on them. The other side of things was, if we did, weren't good, right? So we hung in there and we pushed through. I grew up in Gold River, and my husband got a job there, so we moved. The social workers in Vancouver, they are a part of the Circle 5 group, which is a fully Indigenous. So even though we weren't biological family to them, we were welcomed because that was their way. My biological grandchildren are their biological niece and nephews, so we are connected, and they were being raised with their family. My grandson is 10. Michael turned 11 at the middle of April, and Daryl turned 10 at the end, and then Megan will be 10 in November. So they're all the 3 oldest are within the same age group. We moved to Gold River. Everything was as fine as it could be. We worked through things. I pushed for counseling, which is hard. It's very hard to get. We had great social workers in Vancouver. We had a worker that was the mental health worker that, I could call at any time, and we could work through things and talk about it. And then Campbell River insisted on our file being transferred, and that's where the trouble started. There is no, and these kids are what are called CCO, so continued custody order. The government is their guardian. Mom had her rights taken away at birth because of everything else and the other 6 kids. Nobody else has rights about what happens with those kids but the government. The social worker in Surrey allowed us to parent them. There were, of course, anything that had legalities, we couldn't sign any of that. They had to do it. But because we were adopting them, she just allowed us to parent them and be with them. And it's what they needed. They needed stability and they needed belonging and to know this is my family. And we gave them that. Megan took a long, long time through school. There were a number of days where we had to go and pick her up because she would just wreck the whole classroom. She took a wooden cabinet and pulled it over. They had to evacuate the whole kindergarten class into the gym. But everybody at the school was great. They could see the little girl through her trauma, right? Because she was the sweetest. She was the sweetest little girl. So Camp River got their file. And all of a sudden, we were getting calls about us. They were like, well, we got a call about this, and we got a call about this. And we're like, it's been 3 years that we've had them. Not a single call. Never have we had a call about our grandkids who are also special needs. So why all of a sudden we're in this other office, and we got a social worker that was, these are our kids and everything is our decision and you have no rights in their life whatsoever. The big difference between, the adjustment was huge. Absolutely huge. The adoption was taking forever. That summer, our social worker said, I suggest that you go to a transfer of custody rather than adoption because it's going to be quicker. And we just wanted everything finalized and for everybody. And so we did, not realizing the implications and what was going to happen. So in June, there was a call and they came and investigated. And they said, everything's fine, your home is safe, there's nothing wrong. We have no concerns. And in September was when the call came saying, there's no concerns, but here are 3 things that we want you to do anyways, right? And so we did them. One was a course that the social workers were supposed to set up, and they never did. The other things we did, and at this point, our social worker had not been in our home for over a year. She would stop in at the school and see the kids. If I knew that she was coming, I'd say, come to the house, come and see me, have a quick chat. But she never did. She never had the time. Everything was on her time, and we didn't matter. We had no idea that there had been apparently a call in January. And it was all about that, the way that I dealt with things. And apparently it came from the school, which the school is like, no, we have no idea. We don't support their removal. We don't think you've done anything wrong. So my mom voice where I don't know. So we got a call in November saying they were moving the kids. And we were like, what? Because we didn't know anything was wrong. We didn't know anything. We loved those children, and we were through thick and thin with them. Our youngest daughter had just graduated when we took them on, and we would have been empty nesters aside from helping with our grandchildren, but we couldn't see them staying careless. They were family to us because they were our grandchildren's family. And our daughter's boyfriend, I helped him get his file from Child and Family Services. It was over 2,000 pages long. And so, because he had answered questions about things, so he read through that to get some closure. So I've seen, what happens when you don't know your background, because he knew nothing of his biological family aside from his grandma and grandpa and just little bits and pieces. So we got this call and we were floored. We were like, what? We know nothing about any of this, aside from the one we knew nothing. We knew nothing was wrong. And they're like, You didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this. We're like, one, the course you guys are supposed to set up and you never did. And the other two things we're doing them, but you wouldn't know because you haven't asked. But they still put it in writing saying, we didn't do this, and they did this whole write-up. Make caregivers out to be these horrible monsters that we're not. So we worked through things. Support services that were there turned on us and said, no, we can't help you when it was time. So they left them with us for a few weeks. They threatened us that if we couldn't be quiet to the kids and not tell them, that they would remove them right then and there. So they came in on a Monday. We had no idea because, again, they thought we had no rights to know anything. They went to the daycare because they went to after-school care, took the kids in a room by themselves, and told them that they were moving them and they were never coming home again. I thought, well, my friend's mom had just passed away that Saturday that I'd known since I was 5, so I was over at her house when the social worker had called me, and I went down to pick up the kids, thinking that the social worker would be there and we would do this together, and that I can be there to support the kids through this horrible information they were about to get. But no, they told them and then left them with the daycare workers to soothe them while they were screaming and crying. So by the time I got there, they had settled down, so I had my grandkids and the two of them, and they got in the van, and I looked back. I said, did she come? And he says, yes. I said, well, what did she say to you? And he says that she told us that we were moving and we were never coming home again. I said, that is correct. And the two of them just both screamed. They didn't want to move. And then I tried to get, some help and for their voices to be heard, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter what they wanted. They were just kids and they didn't know any better. And this is what was best for them. So they were coming on the Thursday morning to pick them up, and on Wednesday the social worker emailed me and says, I'll be going to the school and getting them. I said, no, you won't. They will be at our house. We're not sending them to school that morning. We sent them to school the rest of the week so that, they could, with their teachers and their support staff and their friends, that they could have some time. And then they came on the Thursday morning, and I tried to give her to the social worker. She's like, no, you go and put her up in the van yourself. Our highway was closed. They got stuck in town for 4 hours. I took a drive. They were sitting at the gas station. The social worker was sitting in the driver's seat just staring forward, not consoling them. The daycare later told me that she had called them, and the daycare said, bring them here so they can play, and that the social worker called them back and said, they're too upset, we're not bringing them. And then they've just pushed us out of their lives. They've accused the biological brother of horrible things to push him out because he has a right, because that's his. And I have done the complaints all the way up to the ombudsperson. The ombudsperson says, yes, they did you wrong. They never should have done that, but all we can do is ask them to apologize. We went to Canada Day celebrations last year, and Michael was there with the Scouts. The social worker told Brandon, after she couldn't get him charged with horrible things through the RCMP, well, the kids just don't want to see you anymore. That's a lie. That's not true. They said to him, if they were to say tomorrow that you could come home, would you still want to come home? And he said yes. And they said, our door's always open. Always. We're always here for you. And I gave him a hug, and away he went. And then, so I've been still advocating with Victoria, and Fairness has helped me with that. But nobody seems to want to touch it because I think Campbell River knows what to say. And they're not willing to back up and say we did wrong, aside from being forced to write a letter. The team lead that made this decision is now their director of operations, who is overseeing her own decision. And it makes absolutely no sense. Nobody is willing to stick their hands in and say, they're in foster care still. They're still with this foster family. They're First Nations. Who knows what they said about us to the band. The band signed off on it. Our grandkids are living with us now. It'll be 2 weeks, August. Their parents are working towards getting them back. My daughter has big mental health issues, and then I've gotten as far as, so I got a call on the Thursday about a month ago from a gentleman from Victoria and said, I've spoken with the heads with Campbell River, and we're going to do a starting point of your grandchildren can see them because they're blood family. So we have to facilitate that. So they're only willing to do sort of what they have to. So I said, fine, whatever. So the next day I was talking in the afternoon to my grandchildren's social worker, and she says, oh, by the way, the kid's social worker emailed me and they're asking to see the grandkids. And I went, what? No, that's a lie. And he said, I just talked to the gentleman yesterday, and this is what was arranged with the higher-ups. They're not asking to see the grandkids. They're too scared to ask for anything because they've been told. We saw them out at the Nation one summer, and she says to me, they're telling me you're not my parents anymore, but you will always be my mom and dad. She went to the psychologist that June when they were still with us. I took her to Victoria. And the psychologist diagnosed her with trauma and attachment disorder. At the end of his report, says the worst thing you could do for this child is move her. And you will not see that in any of their stuff. Campbell River Family Services is funded through the ministry, and that's whose opinion they used, which they blew everything out. The bedroom that Megan had is now where my granddaughter is. It's good enough for my granddaughter, but they picked and poked at it with Megan because my grandchildren are out of care. The ministry doesn't have that control over them like they did with the other kids. We did mediation for the grandkids, and my mom says, where was the other kids' mediation? Where was their rights? Said, but the mediation is the rights of the parents. Their mom's rights were taken away at birth, so the government runs their life. I can only think how horrible it is that the government runs your life without a mom and a dad, even though we're here for love, they don't need to be in care. But that's the difference. Like, we had this great social worker, and then all of a sudden we have a different social worker, and things just change. There's no ground to kind of where everything is the same. Our social worker from Surrey tried to stand up for us. She called the complaints line, and the complaints line called me and said, we can't. She has no say anymore. She was their social worker for when they were little. They were one of those cases for her that was special. With the CCO kids, whichever office has their files has all the say. So the Surrey office had zero pull in what was going on. Absolutely none anymore. And it's all in Campbell River say, and I don't understand that. It's way too much control for one office to have. Way too much. And it creates situations like ours that didn't have to happen. Had they sat down and talked to us and said, this is what we need you to do, we would have done it. The course that they wanted us to take, we've just done it now with our grandkids. We were more than willing to do it. We've taken lots. We did the adoption course. We did a trauma course. We did another one that was guided just towards us. We've done lots of courses and learned many, many things over the last about 7 years now. And we're not opposed to learning and doing what we need to do, but we were raising these children. We knew their needs. We knew what was good for them. And we weren't willing to compromise that. And they didn't like that either. You see them once every 3 months. We see them every day. We know their needs. We need guidance and help, but it's got to come from a place not of hanging over your head and I'm the boss and you're going to do as I say. We were not treated like human beings through that office. I had a disagreement with the worker one day, and she says, well, they're not your kids. And she said it to me another time after that as well. She's very controlling in everything her way. And I'm still fighting. I'm still pushing. And like, those kids belong at home with us. They don't belong to me. It's in foster care. There's no need. Michael was playing hockey. He loved hockey. I'm sure he doesn't have that anymore. We had just gotten Megan to the point where she was in figure skating lessons where she could actually, do it. From September to the day they moved them, not once did we have to pick her up from school. She was doing so well. The ministry won't acknowledge that. The school will. The learning assistance resource teacher that was there, she was there in kindergarten to see her start in all of her challenges. The next year she was out on mat leave, and then she had just come back from mat leave. And was like, wow, she's a different child. She's doing so well. So how is it that we're horrible parents that can't do it? In that call, the team lead says, well, if we let you have custody, we're afraid that people are just going to keep calling. And I'm like, so what? They're unfounded, and you've looked at one and said there's nothing to it. People do that nowadays. I can't guide what somebody else is going to do. If they come in, they come in. And we deal with it. It happens to everybody. But they dismissed years of work and traumatized not just, the kids they moved. My grandson, he misses them dearly. Our whole family's like two families worth of people. The biological auntie, they wouldn't listen to her. They told her that if she continued to have a relationship with us, she would never see her niece and nephew again. The foster family that they came from, she reluctantly told me that she had been told the same thing, because the auntie told me that they had finally gotten to see them, and this foster mom says, and she's been through lots of kids and lots of workers. She says, that worker made me cry. And they finally got to see them. And I said, hey, I hear you got to see the kids. She says, well, I really shouldn't be telling you this because I was told by so-and-so, the worker, that if we talked to you about any of it, that we would never see the kids again. So she's threatening people, and she's still working. Nobody cares. It's abusive and it's harmful. And I know she's still working because she was there when I took the grandkids to see them. So, yeah, and there's been no problem with the grandkids. They've been with us almost 2 years. Not a phone call, not an issue, not a problem. So for a year, apparently there was a problem with us. But everything else outside of that, it's all sunshine and great. So I don't understand. There's just no help for these situations. We would have to spend money that we don't have to go to Supreme Court to take on the government. And who can do that? Millionaires. That's about it. Not us. So we just suffer. My husband can't even talk about them. He was into depression. So I've been the one pushing everything. He'll, when he needs to or whatever, he will. But we don't talk about them. When we saw them last, the foster mom gave me pictures of them. We don't want to see pictures of them being raised by somebody else. But I was gracious and I took them because the kids were sitting there. And she's like, the kids picked out some pictures to give you. And so, yeah. Our story is still very real.
you.